I just rugged you on that. But speaking of rugging, I want to talk about some infrastructure chains that are out here that are going to be helping to take rugging, to make it a thing of the past. And we have a great panel here of some of the thought leaders and startups that are bringing forward some great infrastructure solutions. Very diverse group, and I want them to kind of go through and detail what they're building. And we're going to get into a lively discussion, I'm sure, and we'll try to take some Q&A. So, hey, Dr. K, why don't you tell us a little bit about what Quai Network's doing, the problem it's addressing, and kind of the addressable market?
Yeah, thanks for having me. So Quai Network is a scalable proof of work layer 1 blockchain. And what it's really meant to do is fulfill the original vision that was kind of laid out in the white paper with the statement of peer-to-peer electronic cash. Unfortunately, or fortunately, I guess Bitcoin has done a great job of creating a decentralized store of value, but it doesn't do a good job functioning as cash. Part of that is due to technical limitations of throughput, but another part of that is that people don't want to actually transactionally use stores of value because they expect them to go up in value over time. So what we've done with Quai Network, in addition to figuring out how to scale a blockchain, we actually introduced something called Chi, or an energy dollar, and it's a token whose sort of value in the market always wants to converge to the cost of producing a hash, which is electricity. So you can create a token whose sort of purchasing power is consistent over time. The point is to create something that's actually a challenger to the dollar itself, not a challenger to Bitcoin. So in our system, we have our two tokens. We have the Quai token. It's EVM compatible. It's programmable. That functions in the system as the store of value, but also the finance layer. And then you have the Chi token, which is this energy dollar, so you can use it as a unit of account. You can price goods and services in it. And then it also has the properties of sort of cash-like privacy properties. So we do things that make it private so it can function as a medium of exchange. And so what we're really doing with Quai Network is trying to technically answer the question of how do you not just to create a crypto system with a store of value, but how you actually create a digital, global, decentralized monetary system.
Wow, that's interesting. And as we all know, energy is the biggest thing that the world is addressing right now, whether it comes to AI compute or just your general electricity needs. Hey, Robert, tell us a little bit about what ScaleX is doing and sort of what it's addressing in the marketplace and the problem you're seeing.
Sure. So let me just go back in history a little bit. Me and most of my team, we got into crypto in 2013, and we got into it for a lot of the same reasons a lot of people here got into it. It was supposed to be this global economic layer that people could use all throughout the world. It was inclusive to everybody. It was decentralized, uncensorable, all those kind of things. With time, and I think most people have recognized this, parts of the thing we were as a group trying to build has kind of decayed. The decentralization happens, in networks, but the solutions that we use to provide utility always end up, or most often end up, in some centralized or custodial platform or format. And that's caused us a huge amount of damage. $83 billion lost in bridges, hacks, and exploits. Terrible user interface with 2 coins to do anything. There's a whole bunch of parts about our industry that is not really kind of amenable to the adoption we all keep talking about. So one of my member of my team, he came up with a technology that allows layer 1 blockchains to talk directly together. So when you have this, you can actually have layer 1 like Bitcoin talking to Ethereum if you want that. I'll talk about that a little bit more in a second. But so we don't need these bridges actually. Now, getting rid of bridges to have layer 1 blockchains talk together means that we can actually put more things as layer 1 blockchains. So that means we can now kind of double down on decentralization, not just on networks, but on utility itself. So we can really right now we're trying to kind of silo a lot of liquidity, like everybody's trying to be the chain you build on, but If we decentralize utility, liquidity becomes available throughout the entire industry, and it's much more facile for everybody. It's a lot easier for people to build. You don't need 2 coins to do everything. This technology deployed makes our industry way better than what we have right now. I'll just leave it at that.
Great, thank you. And so, in this industry, it seems like everything comes back to Bitcoin, so perfect. Adon, tell us about Bitcoin OS.
Just a quick note. Unfortunately, Don couldn't make it, so I'm the substitute co-founder.
Yeah. Sorry about that.
And my
I'm just
name's
reading.
close enough. It's Ilan, so we're practically interchangeable. Thanks for having me on this panel. And like my co-panelists mentioned, there are numerous problems with Bitcoin. Anyone who's been in the space long enough knows that Bitcoin is by far the most liquid, most robust, decentralized digital asset in the world. And not only that, the Bitcoin network is the most secure digital network that humankind has ever created. However, it has limitations. It's used today as a store of value, but not as a medium of exchange. It has basically siloed liquidity or stranded liquidity that you can't use with any other network. And so what we're addressing is that fundamental problem that Bitcoin doesn't have eyes or ears to the external world and can't change itself based on actions that happen externally to the network. And so what we're essentially bringing to the network is a level of programmability that can allow any user to verify data or verify compute that happens externally to Bitcoin on the Bitcoin network, and also trigger transactions and actions on the Bitcoin network based on events that happened externally to the network. So the use cases are quite wide in terms of what you can do with that. The first one that comes to mind is abolishing bridges. It's providing the ability to use Bitcoin in DeFi applications. Further down the road, we envision that AI agents are going to be using Bitcoin on behalf of their operators. You're going to have any external system, whether it's databases, cloud computing, gaming, banking, financial services, giving them the ability to write state onto Bitcoin and to leverage Bitcoin's security to give the same level of decentralization and censorship resistance to many other types of compute.
Great, excellent. So where I want to take this now, so we've heard a little bit about some of the projects. These are all DNA portfolio companies. And part of the thing that we're trying to do is we're trying to invest in the infrastructure future. And so we have a couple great projects here. I want to talk a little bit now, hearing a lot about bridges and, the vulnerabilities there. Robert, do you want to talk a little bit more about the total market threat there and how, ScaleX and maybe how you're working with others and who you're working with to address some of that?
Sure. So as I said before, I think we all know this, and not only are bridges hard to use, they are an attack surface, and they have been, since we started using them. And so really eliminating them solves two things. One, they're no longer an attack surface, but more important, the way we're proposing to have chains talk to each other eliminates the confusion about how to move things from one to another. So it's super important that, yes, even if our bridges were perfectly good, you still need to understand that there is a bridge that you need to use. And so if I want to move from one chain to another, I have to go look up how to do it. There's 106 interoperability projects right now out there. That in and of itself is part of the problem. Even if like one or two of them good, you now have to go do research to understand how things move from this chain to that chain. So we're proposing a model where we don't need that anymore. We're proposing a model where the chains have addresses on other chains, essentially. They're not the same addresses you guys use. They're a different kind. And so you can just move it to the other chain's address and your funds go in there. You never have to actually look up how it gets there because it's validators talking to each other. that eliminates that attack surface and it opens up a lot of other opportunities. So for example, we're starting to work with QBTCs, one of them. And so now as we do that and we deploy this into their chain and we use our things, we can give them a fully scalable set of utilities that didn't exist before. And it looks like just extending that blockchain straight out, and it's just a lot easier for everyone. Imagine AI, for example. We want blockchain to be crypto money. I'm sorry, AI money, right? Like, we want agents to be able to traverse our industry, get the utility they want, and crypto is just like AI money. That was proposed to me like a year ago, and it took me a while to understand that. But I don't think we can have it as AI money as long as these points of friction are in the way for it to be able to traverse our entire industry. So those are the parts where eliminating bridges is critically important. Decentralizing utility may or may not, I think we probably have different opinions on decentralizing utility. But for me, that's really where we're going. We can be AI money, we can be human money, but it needs to be like very facile to move throughout the industry before we can get real adoption from traditional industries and getting AI to actually be the utility that we want it to be.
So, I want to ask, Alon and Robert, for your solutions, Bitcoin is a trustless, permissionless network. What parts of BOS and ScaleX does a user need to trust or not trust? And go ahead.
So I think as a first principle understanding, transaction on Bitcoin mainnet is the most secure digital asset transaction you can do. Any other more sophisticated transaction that you do on top of that is introducing additional risk. And the question is, how do you quantify that risk, and how does it compare to what's available today? So I'm of the general opinion that the end user for most of these L1 blockchains and systems will be entities such as custodians, financial institutions, large companies that are providing a network for their users for whatever use case that may be, and then are utilizing the industry in a different way, where our thesis is the industry will converge on a Bitcoin standard simply because that's what institutions are most comfortable with. It's the highest degree of security, and if you can make it scalable, then there's just a shelling point on that blockchain. So in terms of what your counterparty risk is when you're using a system like BOS, our model is a one-of-n model, where if you're an entity like Bank of America, you want to give your users the ability to utilize Bitcoin for whatever purpose, you can run a node within our network, and so long as that node is operating, it is able to provide validation for certain ZK proofs on the chain, on Bitcoin's main chain, that certain activities has occurred. And you can validate that by yourself, and you just need one honest actor within the network. Now, these nodes are not something that retail users are going to run. They're still going to, they will have the option to, right? I mean, Bitcoin gives you the option for self-custody, but a lot of people prefer custodial solutions. But the bank itself that is running these operations on behalf of their users, if they want to benefit from what is truly the first global industry that's ever existed and partake in decentralized finance, they will be running a node validating that all of the activity is genuine and that there aren't any attacks within the network. Now again, the additional trust assumptions that you're taking are that the node is running correctly, that our network has not been compromised, but the goal is to minimize that and improve the current state, which, for instance, if you want to use WBTC, you are relying on BitGo, you're relying on their smart contracts, you're relying on Ethereum's consensus mechanism, and so you have many levels of obscured trust that isn't always obvious to the end user. So the idea is to minimize that to the extent possible.
Yeah, and I totally agree with almost everything you said there. Actually, everything. I just think there's more. So one of the examples I use, going back to bridges, is really you have to trust multiple parts of that to work. And that's true, as you mentioned, even for Bitcoin, Bitcoin OS, you have to trust the tool set that you brought to the table for that. And generally in smart contracts, on top of other chains, you generally have to trust that somebody built the smart contract right. You have to trust that they did their key management right. If it's something that requires an oracle, you have to trust that their oracle is not compromised. So there's a ton of places where trust happens, and like one of our goals is to eliminate as many points of those trusts as possible. We think it can be almost all of it, but then you get to a good point because blockchains themselves have different levels of trust. It's a spectrum, so Bitcoin's definitely the highest. What's nice about doing decentralized utility is that you can actually measure, there's 10 nodes in this blockchain, so the trust is low in it. Where there's 10,000 nodes in this blockchain, the trust is pretty high in it. So we have a way now to go beyond the smart contracts in terms of the way we utilize utility in blockchain. So we can measure how much we should be able to trust rather than people's word.
Great. So, and Dr. K, how is Quai Network specifically addressing this trust problem, and how are you educating your user base on those risks and things like that?
Yeah, so the way we built Quai, it's actually very simple. We kind of believe that the only mechanism to get security in a decentralized system is proof of work. To scale proof of work, we had to create a sharded hierarchy of merge mine chains. The interesting thing about that is the proof of work can be reused through this process we call coincident blocks. So in the process of mining one of the shards, you produce these blocks that allow the shards to reference each other. So the single process and the single security assumption that goes under proof of work, that you have 51% of honest hash rate, is the same assumption that underlies the shards communicating with each other. So I would say it's the only form of what you might consider trustless bridging amongst chains, but in some ways, when you look at Quai Network, even though it looks like multiple chains that represent shards, because it's all under the same security assumption around proof of work mining, they're actually one chain. They're not actually multiple chains. They're just chains that have privileged access to a certain subset or subspace of the address space. So more fundamentally, we don't see a good way to get around the bridging problem. We always think there is sort of like a trust issue associated with it. If you're going to go from one proof of work system to another proof of work system, or a proof of stake system to a proof of work system, there's something going on with oracles or validators or understanding the state of both of those systems, and somebody is making an attestation to that isn't usually provable, which means you're introducing an oracle, and via an oracle you're introducing a set of privileged signers somehow. So our thesis is you need to build the multitude of chains into a single system, and they need to communicate under the single security model, which is proof of work.
So unless you use Scalix. So that's the specific thing that this technology has obviated. Happy to talk with you about it later, but the oracle problem between blockchains, that's the core of the technology that we provide.
So we have about 3 to 5 minutes left. I do want to see if there's any interesting questions from the audience. Otherwise, I do have a final question for the panel. Anyone brave enough? All right, let's finalize this by give me some of your general thoughts on the quantum risk that's looming, and maybe how you're thinking about that for your individual projects. Does anyone want to go first? Yeah, go ahead.
So just as a background, I have a doctorate in material science. I can actually speak to this quite a bit. We also have an advisor, Stephen Wolfram, who's a theoretical physicist. The reason he's an advisor to Quai is because the mechanism by which you scale proof-of-work blockchains is analogously convergent to his fundamental theory of physics. And we both have actually talked about quantum and the quantum threat, and we both believe that quantum is bullshit. And the reason for that comes from multiple different ways, but I'll try to give the simplest form of it. Every quantum assumption about quantum computing relies on the concept of qubits not having correlated error rates. However, we all know that quantum computers, when they entangle qubits, must do so at a very low temperature. The reason for that is the thermal environment. Do you think if you're entangling qubits that you don't have a shared thermal environment? You obviously do. So if you have a shared thermal environment, the sort of assumption of non-correlated errors is a bad assumption. You should assume that you're going to have correlated error rates, which means as you increase the number of qubits, you're going to run into something that's as fundamental as the uncertainty principle, and that you're not going to be able to entangle enough qubits with a low enough error rate to make it actually useful. And this is something that both myself and Wolfram agree on.
Anyone else?
That is definitely a point of view I've not heard before. So my last company was on quantum safe data storage. That whole company was built upon the idea of an incoming quantum computer threat where we didn't know the date. So it's not like Y2K where everybody knows we got to fix stuff by then. We don't know when that date is. Back when I was working there, that was 10 years away, and progress has happened. And I literally cannot answer to what you just said. I don't have a response for that. You may be right. There is a ton of work being done on that, and I have trouble not accepting that as a true threat, to the point where there are now encryption methodologies that work, of which NIST is working on 9. 3 have been approved. One of them is appropriate for blockchain, and I guess if you don't believe quantum is a threat, then that's one action. For me, I think we should be building towards it. And like all of our service chains that we're going to be putting out, they'll all be quantum resistant. There's no quantum proof. And so that's the way we're approaching it.
All right, final thought?
Yeah, I mean, it's a trustless industry, but this is above my pay grade, so I'm going to have to trust the esteemed doctor. But I think the only thing I'll say about it is that the general view is that Bitcoin is very much an ossified chain that doesn't change, and to some degree that's true. But if you zoom out, it's only been around for about 15 years or so, and it has undergone significant change in that span of time. So I think the chain is robust enough, the nodes are robust enough to upgrade as needed if there are future threats to its security assumptions. And I think it's proven itself resilient in that regard in terms of adapting to external change.
I do just have to add one thing when we're talking about the quantum piece. There's cryptography that exists that is quantum resistant, and saying that you need quantum to sort of protect the blockchains. Not every part of the cryptography or functions that are used can be broken by quantum. So for example, in Bitcoin, SHA-256 is not quantum vulnerable.
Correct.
Right? The signatures are potentially quantum vulnerable, assuming that you can get quantum to work, but there's other forms of public-private key cryptography that don't have that problem. So in some ways, it's a little bit of a non sequitur. Yes, there's like this correlated sort of upgrade thing. The problem with Bitcoin is some of the transactions were not hashed early on, so a lot of Satoshi's coins are sitting vulnerable if you are able to run quantum attacks on those keys. But in some ways, it's just like a coordination problem to upgrade to quantum-proof cryptography, and it's really only the public-private key pair schemes that are vulnerable to it.
Well, thank you, Dr. K. You've reduced my paranoia just by 2%, but thank you. All right.
Well, there's one other piece to this. So, like when we talk about quantum, there's like this, there's like the long quantum vulnerability and there's the short quantum vulnerability. So in Bitcoin, if you created a quantum computer that kind of worked, Satoshi's coins are at risk.
Yes, absolutely.
But if any other transaction that went under the double SHA-256, those are only exposed for the duration of when the transaction is broadcasted to include it in the block.
Right.
So going from saying you can break one of the curves under some very long time period is way different than saying, can you break it in the duration that it exists in the mempool? So in terms of like Bitcoin's fix, it's really just in some ways forking out Satoshi's coins, and like that's it. It's a coordination problem, nothing else.
Yeah, definitely a social consensus people coordination problem, which, as we've seen from governance, is the most challenging thing I think humans have ever had to address. Anyway, thank you all. These folks are going to be around DNA House, so if you have any questions, feel free to come up and ask them. Thank you all for being an attentive audience. Really appreciate it, and we're at time, so thank you very much.
Thank you.